The question was, how much would it cost to have small donor matching? And the short answer is, I don't think anyone can give a reasonable estimate. I have not seen any estimates at all, and I don't think any have been done. In fact, there's no proposal on the table in Illinois, and I don't know if there's going to be a politician out there who's going to propose it. But if there was, one thing I would just note would be like, let's just say that they come forward with a cost proposal, and they say, okay, if you look at the last election and you did it, it would cost this much. The problem is, there's an effect, when you pass the law, then it skews, it gives you an incentive to go for the low dollar, so it probably will cost more than that. I mean, that is really the issue with it, right? If it costs nothing, everyone will vote for it. The reality is most people vote for it even with the cost, but I think that's a problem, yeah.
The other question, in light of the Janus decision, you may want to do a better job than I would trying to explain that to everybody. So basically, Janus said you don't have to give money to a union because the union can spend it on political speech that you don't approve of.
Right.
Could the donor matching, since it's being done with public money, could somebody make that same argument that you are therefore giving money to candidates that I don't approve of?
Well, it's being made available to all candidates, so I think that would be okay. But what essentially he's arguing, what he's saying is, could somebody make a constitutional argument that their money is being used for something, for a political party that they disagree with, this is political speech that they don't agree with, and that's unconstitutional, you're forcing me to speak. I think here, because it will be available to all candidates, and it's sort of facially neutral in that way, I think it would be okay. I think the Janus decision, look, I disagree with the decision. Essentially, the Janus decision affected public sector employees, and what it used to have was essentially there's a fee that you had to pay if you were part of a public sector union, or excuse me, if you decided not to, whether you decided to be part of the union or not. If you're a public sector employee, you had to pay this fee because you're essentially free riding on the services of the union if you decided not to be part of it. That had been constitutional for decades. The Supreme Court, in a decision decades ago, decided that was constitutional. That was overturned this last year. That was a big initiative of Governor Rauner's. There are ways to work around it. I proposed one back when I was running. The simple way is essentially for the state to essentially change the way that they're giving you money and give some of it directly, to the union. That would be the simple way to do it. And that eliminates the constitutional issue. For political reasons, that may not always be the easiest thing to do, but we can afford to take some political risks. I will say, personally, my personal view is it's important to have strong unions for all sorts of reasons. I partly because of my background, so I've seen how it affects wages to have a strong union. But on this issue of small donor matching, I think you're okay constitutionally. I can't ever predict what the Supreme Court's going to do or what the Supreme Court could be, but right now we're okay. You had something, and then I'll get you next.
I just wanted, would you spell your name and tell us how we can get your podcast?
Oh, sure. Okay, my name's really hard to spell. My first name is Renato. My last name is Mariotti. If you go to podcast, and if you have an iPhone, it's simple because there's only one app. Okay, so you just go to the podcast app on your iPhone and you search for my name or On Topic, and it'll come up and you subscribe to it and you get my podcast. If you're on an Android, there's a whole slew of different apps. I've learned this because I see all the statistics of who listens to my podcast, and there's things like Stitcher and Google Play and Pocket Cast. So whatever one you want to use, you just put my name in, or you put On Topic, and you'll get my podcast. That's the simplest way to get that. Our last episode that just came out this past weekend was I had a former FBI counterintelligence agent and a former CIA officer who headed up the Moscow operations for the CIA, talking about what it means to be a Russian agent and what that's all about, and all of that news. But I've done things, I did gerrymandering episode, I did an episode on a lot of these issues with a voting, kind of a elections expert. I've done immigration, did a family separations one, and it's basically the goal is to do an in-depth discussion of news. You had a question first, ma'am, and then I'll get you next.
When you were talking about the unions, that was the Fair Share Act?
So there was actually it was essentially a lawsuit that was brought, Janus versus AFSCME. It was kind of instigated by Bruce Rauner and some of the Illinois Policy Institute, some of those folks. And it made it up to the Supreme Court, and it was a 5-4 decision. And so that decision essentially said that you could no longer have these type of fees that you were referring to. It was a very problematic thing for labor, really hurt public sector unions. You had a question first, and I'll give you after.
Yes, what's a comment, and that is, my son lives in Seattle, and he said the whole process of voting was so easy because it was all mail voting. And they got their mail, they voted the way they wanted to, and they put it back in the mail.
If it was
So
all
she's
male
talking-
voting, how did the women feel about that?
So she's saying,
But-
I was like, I was confused there a second. He's
The
much more
other
punny
part
than
of
I am.
this is that during some of the discussion about whether the Russians were really influencing the vote, I heard somebody say that because we have such a scattered system, that it is much harder for them to do. You just told us that Illinois, with its scattered system, was very vulnerable.
It was, so what happened was, so just so I explain what happened. So let me just rephrase, I'm going to repeat her comments, or summarize them just for folks way in the back. Her first point was, you were kind of as a comment, she was talking about, your son is in Seattle, and was talking about how they have essentially an all-male voting, vote by mail system, and he thought that was superior. One thing I'm just going to note before I get to there is a movement in Illinois to have it that you receive your vote by mail automatically. So there's a movement where they're going to try to have it where there's a list you can get on, where you don't have to say each time you want to vote by mail. That seems logical to me. I support that. In other words, if people want to be on the list, that's fine. Moving completely to a vote by mail system, I think, like I said, some millennials may like that more than folks who are, I'm a Gen Xer, but people above, people who are used to, people who are even senior to me who are used to voting in person. I've never voted by mail. I always like to vote in person myself. But as your second point was, and that was a good one, which is our decentralized system makes it harder for someone to hack us because you have to hack every county, right? You can imagine if they want to change the result. If the Russian government wants to change the results in Illinois, they got to hack DeKalb County and Union County and McLean County and every county in between, right? What happened in 2016 was they hacked a server of the Illinois State Board of Elections, and they changed. They didn't change. They tried to change and were not able to change data, but they removed data, or not removed, but because that suggests they deleted. They took or stole it. They stole our data, and so. It's because it was on a centralized location. That's the issue there. I mean, they've done some stuff to improve. From what I've been told, they've done some things to improve the State Board of Elections server security.
Would you touch on how a homeless person would get a ballot by mail?
Yeah, that's another point. So you're saying, if you're homeless, will you get a ballot by mail? Yeah, I mean, the answer is no. I mean, that's similar when I hear people saying, let's do voting over the internet. Well, obviously that advantages certain people over others. I understand. I'm one of those people who's constantly on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or wherever all the time on my phone, but a lot of people, don't even have that, right? My dad's a cashier at Walmart. He doesn't even have a smartphone or the internet. I mean, that's just the reality. And so, for somebody like him, that's not even a possibility. What's the next? Back in the back? Mm-hmm.
So, government software is pretty terrible, just because, and a lot of that's due to the procurement process.
Mm-hmm.
Companies that get involved in the government software game have to spend, their largest departments are legal fees.
Yeah.
Maybe that's exaggerating, but not that much.
Mm-hmm.
Has any of this been looked at from the procurement angle so that we can get better vendors involved in the process?
That's a great question. So, to those of you who didn't hear it, his point was, a lot of the software that government uses often is bad because there's a kind of a complicated procurement process that requires companies to spend a lot of money on that process as opposed to developing the software, and probably ices out companies that are maybe very nimble, smaller companies that are doing great software work, but they don't have those connects to that process. It's an issue. It's an issue in a lot of areas of our government, our defense industry, and others, right? So I haven't heard anybody talk about that, and it's interesting because I have friends in the tech community who've kind of showing me all these, they have these hacker conferences, and they hack in and they make fun of all of our.
12-year-old breaking voting machines.
Yeah, he's talking about these literally these young kids breaking in our voting machines. It is an issue. I mean, I think the reality is, though, we couldn't have a system that you couldn't break into. There's like no way to keep it perfectly secure. Like unless you had it like purely off, even then, right? There'd be ways to infiltrate that. The only thing that you really could do would be to have a paper trail, which I talked about earlier, to be 100% certain of it. I mean, I think there is a movement behind that. I'm sorry. There's so many other comments, so I don't want to take too long. Yeah.
Sort of as a coupling with the campaign finance reform to a certain degree, is another reason why candidates have to spend so much time raising money is that it's almost an endless campaign season.
Yeah.
They're always looking for money because the campaign ads start so far ahead. And I believe, I could be wrong, but in the UK, I believe they have you're limited to 6 weeks before an election before you can even start the campaign and put advertising on TV. So it would limit the amount of money you had to spend on the advertising if you didn't have to do it 12 months before.
So well, let me just tell you, I spent a little bit of time in the UK, and I was there during an election season, and I liked how their election process worked compared to ours. What he's talking about is essentially a limit they have that you can only start campaigning, X number of days before the election. That's great. The only problem is the UK doesn't have the First Amendment.
Yeah,
we do. And the Supreme Court, I'll just tell you, so this is just so so everyone understands my perspective. I'm like a hyper-realist, kind of like I'm a very blunt. You probably figure that out about me. I tend to be a very blunt person. I'm going to be very blunt with you. So the Constitution is what it is, right, the First Amendment. It's almost impossible to amend the Constitution. I can go through the whole process, but good luck with that. It's not going to happen. And the Supreme Court is what it is, right? We already know we have kind of a Republican majority there. That's probably not going to change. We have to hope that on our side of things, that Ruth Bader Ginsburg lasts for, she hangs on for as long as she can. So I'm not hopeful that view will change, and I think the way they would view it, a Republican justice would view it, or a justice, I shouldn't say Republican, but a justice who's more conservative in terms of their judicial philosophy is, you are restricting my ability, me, Bill Gates, Bruce Rauner, J.B. Pritzker, whatever, you're restricting my ability to speak before this date. One other issue for it, I think, would be how do you police what's campaigning for an election? So you could imagine, too, what I would think people would do is, let's say you told J.B. Pritzker he couldn't advertise 120 till 120 days before. He could run ads just talking about how great he is as a human being or his initiatives. I mean, or something else, you know what I mean? Like, wow, we could have the Bruce Rauner's a bad person group that has nothing to do with a candidate, but just hates him as a human being and likes to attack him, or whatever. I mean, you get what I'm saying, right? There's ways around that, and nowadays it's gotten so sophisticated. One thing that I think may have, in some of these other countries, part of the reason it's more workable is by having a sensible system in the beginning. They didn't develop a whole cottage industry associated with doing all this stuff. Now that we've developed this cottage industry of people working their way around the system, it's going to take more to undo that. You had a question, sir?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up the Russian influence, but we should not forget that there have been domestic dirty tricksters that have a long history of involvement in elections, and the sophistication that is out there now with focus groups, polling focus groups, mixed, intermingled, and the ability to manipulate the public is absolutely incredible with the technology that exists. And it troubles me that Democrats spend so much time talking about the Russians when we should be concerned about domestic dirty tricksters.
So, I don't know how everyone heard, but essentially he's saying we spend a lot of time talking about the Russians and the Russian influence, and not enough time talking about dirty tricksters in the United States. I would just say a couple things. First of all, my only context of talking about the Russians today with you, I talk about that stuff on television because I'm asked about it. But the reason I talked about it today is an example of why our servers may not be secure, as a recent example of that. But I agree that we have had voter fraud, or not voter fraud, but by voters, but I mean election fraud. For example, in North Carolina 9, we had that, that was a domestic, example of election fraud that was homegrown, right? what it seemed like you may have been getting at more broadly, which I haven't talked about, and it's such a big topic we could spend the whole time talking about it, is like foreign influence versus, whether our debates are influenced, whether our system of, how we talk about things are people are being misled in some way, and that's like such a big topic. I'm sort of putting it off to the side because we got so many other things to discuss. Yeah.
I don't want to beat this Russian thing too badly, but
Sure.
If you're the Russians and you're looking at this vastly decentralized voting system, I think probably they don't have to hack all counties if they have accurate polling data handed to them by one of the campaign sources, and also if they have access to data through groups like Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, his point is just that an adversary, whether it's the Russians or not, who wants to hack into our system can just target the. First of all, I mean, another way of putting it, this would be a different spin of the same thing. I would say you could also attack its weakest link. In other words, if you're trying to change the vote totals in Illinois, or do whatever, just make a mess in Illinois, like create chaos. You don't need. You could just find the one county that's got really bad security, and go to that county, and you could have really good security. That's why it's important to bring everybody up, not just have it in certain areas. But what his point is that you don't need to, it's decentralized, but you could target just the right spots, especially if you're getting voter data, which I've talked a lot about online and offline about the handing off of the voter data or the polling data, insider polling data. The point I would just say about all of that is, one of the things that we need to do because our system is decentralized is we need to have ways of measuring the security of our voting system. So, the Center of American Progress came out with report cards for each state on election security. We're a C, I think. We're in the kind of the middle of the pack, but some states are much better. Some states are worse, even worse than us. But I think one of the things that is important to be able to do is to be able, because folks in your county, for example, how the hell do you know whether you're how secure and how together your clerk is? There's got to be measured standards that you can use to say, okay, we have this or we don't have that. Very specific things. Just man.
There's something I'm clearly not understanding about voting by mail.
Okay.
What's the security level on that? My mind sees like that piece of paper being handled by like how many people? How do you know where it ends up?
Yep. So I think it's a valid point. So what she's saying is, what's the security for voting by mail? In other words, I put my vote in the mailbox. I don't know who handles it. I don't know where it goes from there.
You may not have even gotten it.
Right. So
Somebody else got it and voted for you.
One could imagine, for example, he was saying domestic election fraud. Somebody going mailbox by mailbox and looking for ballots and taking them, right? And in North Carolina 9, there was some effort to go door to door. Now, what they did there, if I recall, is they tricked folks into giving them their ballots, saying that they were going to collect them and so on and so forth, right? It's a little different, but it's similar in concept. So I think the answer, I'm not an advocate for any side of any of this, okay? If you can, I haven't figured out already, but if I was gonna wear the hat, I was the lawyer for the vote by mail caucus or something, what I would say is, well, it's decentralized, right? You don't know exactly when your particular vote goes in the mail, and it's gonna take a lot of effort for somebody to find your particular ballots and change them, and it's harder to target that, and so on and so forth. And so there's a certain layer of security there, because it's never worth just targeting one vote or one particular ballot. You need to do it on a mass scale. That, I assume, would be the argument. I don't know, but that I would assume. Would you? Let me get you next, because you already.
This is kind of overlapping with one of my favorite subjects, the citizen activism.
Okay.
Because in Illinois, what we have is some pretty nifty laws if we know how to use them. First place, we're dealing with the county clerk. And he's going to have to comply with the Freedom of Information Law. So, for example, here, if you were suspicious that, say, the county clerk was purposely, I don't say yes, but I'm saying then
Right.
you could request information like the email listing to see who he's talking to.
Sure.
Because it's a database. You can bring in the power of the state to the side of the activist. And so, or you can see if there's unduly talking to certain, if you want to see who he's talking to or doing voting machines. And is he,
Yeah.
you know,
Sure.
or in different counties. You can use your power as an individual, which you have quite a bit in this state, actually.
Well, I will tell you, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's off topic,
Right.
okay, to an extent. But I would just say, because he's talking about using transparency as a way of making sure that your local, for example, county clerk in this case, is doing a good job with voting. I think that's great. And what I would say is, a lot of people ask me, maybe because I used to be a federal prosecutor for a decade, what can we do to stop corruption in our state, which would be a whole other, okay, we have to come back here another day and do that talk, okay? But one thing I would say is I think one of the best ways to do it is to have laws that require increased transparency. Because the more transparent things are, the more you structurally are able to catch things through what you're saying. I mean, if it was up to me, and it's not, okay, because I don't think, it's kind that you care about what I think, but I don't think people in Springfield necessarily care that much. But I wouldn't just have, donations public, or even have a FOIA, FOIA process, by the way, is so broken that, it can take years to get a response to your FOIA, and they have all these exceptions. But even putting that to the side, to me, I think when you meet with somebody, you should have a record of every meeting you've had, if you're a public official, and say, I met with these people. Something, I have a friend, Walt Schaub, some of you know him, he does a lot of ethics stuff, and he told me he thinks that's one of the best ways. Because then you get to see how your elected representatives really spending their time, who they're hanging out with, and so forth. But, so anyways, I think that is.
Calendars are wonderful things.
Exactly, I think that is a good way of doing it. You had a point?
Well, I guess back to the vote by mail.
Sure.
My biggest issue is if you have a household, and say there's a real domineering personality in that household, who insists that everybody there, spouse, children, brother-in-law, whomever, votes a certain way.
Yeah, you can verify it, essentially. That person can see your vote.
Yes, and there's no control on that. So you lose the secrecy of the ballot.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and actually, I think, I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's an important point. So one point that he's bringing up with vote by mail is, it actually harkens back to an earlier age in our history. So there was a time when employers would want, for example, their employees to vote Republican, and they would be watching, they'd have the boss, the boss would be watching to make sure that you were voting the right way. It wasn't really a secret ballot. To make sure you're voting the right way for the candidate that the boss wanted. So there's a lot of laws that we have and practices that we have to ensure that your ballot's secret for a good reason. Because we want you to not be influenced by, not whether it's the boss in that case, or he's talking about the overbearing family member. Many of my family members are overbearing and voted for Trump, and they know I didn't. It's pretty obvious by now I didn't, and they're not happy about it. I have to listen to them talk about it. You can imagine somebody voting a certain way just to shut up the person who's overbearing. That is an issue of paper ballots. It's an issue with the internet voting, which people we talk about from time to time. So yeah, I agree that's an issue. Yep, Elizabeth?
I just had a couple of points that I wanted to make about small donor matching that go back to Paul's original question.
Yeah.
One is, I can't remember the name of it, but there is a case headed toward to the Supreme Court that is related to the Janus decision of small donor matching, and that exact idea of I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to a candidate that I don't like. I don't remember the name of the decision or where it is. I think I read about it at the Campaign Legal Center website. The other thing is the small donor matching bill that did make it through the Senate in 2017, Senate Bill 1424, that actually did make it through the Senate. That had caps on the dollar amounts that candidates could collect for each race. So that was $5 million of matched funds that you could get for governor. I think it was $1 million for other statewide races, and then $300,000 for state senate and $150,000 for state rep. And that's just the matched dollars that each candidate could collect. So there is always a cap on what these things cost. And New York State is actually like seriously talking about expanding small donor matching to the entire state. And there are some new figures that have come out about what they estimate their cost would be. And they base that on what the city of New York costs, which is 0.03% of the city's budget. So it is a very, very small, and the Brennan Center has a lot of good data on that. So it is a very, I think they said that comes out to $2 per New Yorker. So the cost is pretty low, and then you do build caps into that cost. The other, and New York City did recently beef up the amount that they are willing to match. I think they increased it by ballot referendum in November to now they will match a 9-to-1 match instead of a 6-to-1 match.
That's great.
So yeah, so and then the other thing I wanted to say is that Representative Kelly Cassidy is definitely going to be reintroducing the small donor matching bill this session, and I think it's Heather Staines that's gonna be introducing it in the Senate. And the only group that I know of that would be in support of small donor matching that operates out of DeKalb is the League of Women Voters. So you do have the DeKalb League of Women Voters.
Would you tell us who you are and what your capacity is?
Yes. who
Well,
are
my
you?
name's Elizabeth Lindquist. I am the issues specialist for campaign finance reform for the State League of Women Voters. I'm also the chapter leader of Represent Rockford, and you guys don't have a Represent Us chapter here in DeKalb, but you do have some people from DeKalb that come out to our Represent Us meetings in Rockford, among a whole bunch of other things I do. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is somebody mentioned Seattle. The democracy voucher type plan that Renato talked about is in operation in the city of Seattle. They've only gone through one election cycle using it, and it, I will admit, did not demonstrate phenomenal success in its first cycle. But it was the first time anybody anywhere had done this, and so I think we need to give them a break. The other really cool thing is that Representative Rocana from California has introduced a federal democracy voucher bill that won't go anywhere, but I mean it's nice. And actually, I'll say one more thing, and that is that there is also a really concerted effort to get small donor matching in the city of Chicago based on that original referendum that got 79% support. And so there is a really, I mean, there's a lot of movement on small donor matching in the city of Chicago. And there will be a lot at the state level. I mean, the Democrats, we've been saying for years that we support, small donor matching and optional public financing. And we have control all, branches of government now in the state of Illinois, and the cost is very low, so we really have no excuse.
Yeah, I agree. Wait, so let me just say a couple things in response to Elizabeth. First of all, in case you don't know, Elizabeth also ran for public office in a very brave way, and had all sorts of various adventures that if you can Google and find out about that she had to go through with that process. And so has really been a leader, and I want to just commend you for still remaining so engaged in the process.
Yes.
So thank you for
the
that.
The picture of her in the teacup was special.
Yeah, there you go. But I really know, I admire that.
I
'Cause
think I
look,
look better in Trump's pocket.
but there's a lot of people who run